There are names in history that rise like storms and then disappear into silence. And then there are names that refuse to die. Among them stands Spartacus, a man born in obscurity, buried without a grave, yet remembered as the greatest rebel Rome ever faced. His life lasted barely a few decades, but his legend has lasted thousands of years. His revolt shook the foundations of the world's most powerful empire and inspired every generation that ever dreamed of freedom. This is not the story of a king, a philosopher, or an emperor. It is the story of a slave. A man who broke his chains. A man who dared to say no to the Roman Empire and almost won. This is the full story of Spartacus, told not as myth, but as reality, raw, cinematic, historical, and deeply human. Long before he became a symbol of resistance, Spartacus was simply a child of Thrace, a land of mountains, forests, cold winds, and wild freedom. Thrace was the frontier between worlds, the Greeks to the south, the Scythians to the north, and the rising Roman power pressing from the west. Thracians were known as fierce fighters, agile with blades, skilled horsemen, hunters, and warriors from childhood, proud, independent, and deeply spiritual. This environment shaped Spartacus long before Rome ever touched his life. Though much about his early years is lost, one truth stands firm: he belonged to a warrior people. He grew up in a culture where honor was valued more than wealth, where courage was taught more than fear, and where a man's worth was measured by his spirit. Ancient writers hint that Spartacus was not only strong, he was intelligent, disciplined, and unusually charismatic. Even as a young man, he carried the presence of a leader. And it was this talent that would eventually attract Rome. Many Thracians served in the Roman auxiliary forces. It was practical: Rome needed skilled fighters, and Thracians needed opportunities. Spartacus likely joined the Roman army in his youth. This period transformed him. He learned Roman tactics, understood their discipline, studied their formations, saw the power of the legions up close, but something happened and Rome turned from his employer to his captor. Some sources claim Spartacus deserted the army. Others say he refused a Roman commander's orders. Others believe Rome simply enslaved him along with many Thracians resisting Roman expansion. Whatever the truth, Spartacus was taken prisoner, marched in chains, and sold like property. From a soldier, he had become a slave. From a free man, he had become entertainment. His fate now lay in the brutal world of Roman gladiators. Capua was home to one of the largest gladiator schools in Italy, the Lentulus Batiatus School, a place where hope died and violence lived. This was no ordinary prison. It was a factory of death. Inside its walls, men trained from sunrise to sunset, wooden swords turned into steel, bruises turned into scars, and fear turned into obedience. Gladiators were divided by ethnicity: Thracians, like Spartacus, Gauls, Germans, Syrians, Africans, and even Roman criminals. Some fought with swords. Some with spears. Some with nets and tridents. The training was systematic: eat, fight, sleep, survive. Repeat until death or victory. Spartacus endured this world for years, but the fire inside him did not die. In the silence of the training grounds, something grew inside him: resolve. Others saw it. They watched the way he carried himself. The way he planned, thought, calculated. The way he refused to break. In the hearts of the gladiators, Spartacus had already become a leader. But soon, he would become something far greater: a spark. The rebellion began not with swords, but with whispers. Inside the gladiator school, a secret plan was forming, a dangerous, desperate attempt to escape. Nearly 200 gladiators coordinated in silence, waiting for the right moment. But Rome's walls had ears. The plan was discovered. Only about 70 men, including Spartacus, Crixus, Enamors, and Gannicus, managed to act before guards came crashing in. They seized anything they could find: kitchen knives, iron spits, wooden staves, sharp fragments of metal. With these makeshift weapons, they fought their way out of the school, killing guards, breaking open locked gates, and escaping into the countryside. But escape alone was not survival. Rome would hunt them relentlessly. So they fled to the only place that offered natural protection: Mount Vesuvius. On that mountain, a rebellion was born. The Roman Senate initially responded with arrogance. They sent a praetor, Gaius Claudius Glaber, with a small force of local militia. Rome believed Spartacus was nothing more than a runaway gladiator, not a threat. Glaber surrounded the rebels on Mount Vesuvius, blocking the only paths down, or so he thought. Spartacus studied the terrain. He understood the mountain's hidden paths and natural escape routes. In the darkness of night, he ordered his men to cut vines, twist them into makeshift ropes, and climb down the steep cliffs behind Glaber's camp. Then, in a sudden, ferocious assault, the gladiators attacked from the rear, a direction the Romans hadn't even considered. Glaber's forces were annihilated. Rome was stunned. This was no ordinary revolt. This was a military genius. And Spartacus was only getting started. As news of the victory spread across Italy, slaves began fleeing their masters to join Spartacus. Shepherds, farmers, miners, and laborers swarmed to his cause. Within months, the rebel army grew to tens of thousands. They were not merely running away from slavery, they were marching toward freedom. Spartacus shaped them into an army. He trained them, organized them, divided them by units, and enforced discipline. He was not just a rebel, he was a commander. His army took Roman supplies, weapons, and armor. They defeated Roman detachments in the countryside. They raided wealthy estates and freed the enslaved workers. Rome's embarrassment grew. The greatest empire in the world could not stop a man who, according to Roman pride, should have died in the arena. But Spartacus was not fighting for the arena. He was fighting for destiny. As Spartacus' forces swelled into the tens of thousands, Rome finally understood that this was not a band of escaped gladiators. This was an uprising. A social earthquake. A threat to the very structure of Roman society. Slaves were Rome's foundation. They worked farms, mines, workshops, households, and estates. A slave rebellion this large was not just a military challenge, it was an existential nightmare. If Spartacus succeeded, Rome feared that millions might join him. But Spartacus didn't use his growing numbers recklessly. He shaped them into a disciplined force that shocked every Roman commander who faced them. He established scouting patrols, supply lines, weapons workshops, training grounds, command hierarchy. He turned raw, terrified slaves into fighters. He gave them the impossible, hope. And with each victory, his legend grew. Insulted by the defeats, the Roman Senate sent 2 consuls with legions to crush the rebellion. Rome expected a swift end. Instead, Spartacus shattered them. In battle after battle, the rebels outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and outfought professional Roman soldiers. Spartacus understood Roman tactics. He had learned them during his service as an auxiliary, and he used that knowledge to tear holes through their strategies. Roman generals underestimated him because he was a slave. Spartacus defeated them because he did not underestimate himself. Sources tell us that after one decisive battle, Spartacus forced captured Roman officers to fight as gladiators, not out of cruelty, but as a symbolic reversal of roles. Rome, which once used slaves as entertainment, now tasted the humiliation it had inflicted. By now, Rome was frightened. This was no longer a revolt. It was a war. With Italy in chaos and Rome failing to stop him, Spartacus saw an opening, a path to true liberation. He planned to lead his entire army north, toward the Alps. If they crossed the mountains, the rebels could scatter, Thracians to Thrace, Gauls to Gaul, Germans to Germania. Freedom lay beyond the mountains. The dream was within reach. Ancient historians record that Spartacus marched north with a massive army, defeating Roman forces along the way. But at the foothills of the Alps, something happened that changed everything. The rebels hesitated. Some refused to leave Italy. Many wanted more wealth, revenge, conquest. Others believed Rome could be defeated entirely. Spartacus wanted to escape Rome. Many of his followers wanted to destroy it. Under pressure from his own troops, the army turned south again, a decision that would alter the fate of the rebellion forever. The unity of the rebel army began to crack. A major division occurred between Spartacus and one of his most trusted commanders, Crixus, leader of the Gallic and Germanic fighters. Crixus believed in battle without retreat. in total war against Rome. Spartacus believed in strategic survival, in escape and preservation. Their visions clashed. Crixus split from Spartacus with tens of thousands of men. Rome seized the opportunity. The Romans ambushed Crixus' forces and slaughtered them. Crixus himself was killed. When Spartacus learned of his death, he was overcome with sorrow and fury. Ancient accounts say that he forced Roman captives to fight in mock gladiatorial games as a funeral offering to honor Crixus, a gesture both symbolic and deeply emotional. His army mourned. But Rome celebrated. The cracks in the rebellion had begun to show. Realizing the rebellion was spiraling out of control, the Roman Senate took a drastic step. They appointed a single commander with extraordinary authority, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, ruthless. Calculating, ambitious, determined to crush Spartacus at any cost, Crassus brought 6 fresh legions, brutal discipline, vast personal wealth, relentless strategic pressure to eliminate cowardice among his troops. He revived the ancient punishment of decimation, killing 1 in every 10 soldiers who fled battle. Crassus was not here to manage a revolt. He was here to end a war. He dug trenches, built fortifications, and created massive walls across Italy to trap Spartacus in the south. This was no longer a pursuit, it was a cage. Spartacus was cornered. But he was not yet defeated. As Crassus tightened the noose around the rebels, Spartacus searched for another escape route. The Alps were no longer reachable, Rome had blocked the north. So Spartacus turned to the sea. He negotiated with Cilician pirates, offering treasure in exchange for transport to Sicily, where the rebels could regroup and continue the fight. But the pirates betrayed him. They took the money, and vanished. Spartacus and his army were stranded. Surrounded by Roman fortifications. Pressed by hunger. Hunted from all sides. This betrayal destroyed the last major chance for mass escape. Rome sensed victory. But Spartacus was not done fighting. Not yet. Winter of 72 to 71 BCE brought a silence across southern Italy, but it was not peace. It was the quiet before a storm. Spartacus knew the rebellion was entering its final stage. Supplies were dwindling. Roman forces pressed from every direction. Crassus' fortifications cut off escape routes. The rebel army, once disciplined and unified, was now exhausted, hungry, and losing morale. But even in this tightening cage, Spartacus remained defiant. He attempted one last breakout. One last chance to shatter Crassus' fortifications and reach open ground. Ancient historians describe a brutal night when Spartacus ordered his men to fill Roman trenches with earth, rocks, logs, anything they could find. They fought their way through parts of Crassus' wall and spilled into the open countryside. Rome was stunned. The trapped lion had escaped the cage. But the breakout came at a cost, thousands were lost, supplies were non-existent, the army was fragmented, and Crassus was now marching with full force behind them. Spartacus knew the end was approaching, but he refused to face it quietly. If Rome wanted him, Rome would have to pay in blood. The final battle took place near the river Silurus in southern Italy. Spartacus stood before his army, no throne, no armor of gold, no banners. Only a sword. Only resolve. Ancient accounts describe a moment that has echoed through time. Before the battle, Spartacus reportedly killed his own horse. When his men asked why, he replied, "If I win, I shall have many horses. If I lose, I will have no need of one." These words electrified his troops. They saw not a gladiator, but a king without a crown. As the Roman legions approached, the rebels formed their lines. Spartacus positioned himself where the battle would be fiercest, not behind the army, but at the front. Then the earth shook with the charge. The final clash was not a simple defeat. It was a storm of violence, courage, and desperation. Spartacus and his men fought with the intensity of those who had broken chains and refused to return to bondage. Spartacus cut down Roman soldiers one after another, pushing forward toward Crassus himself. He fought like a man trying to carve his way to fate. Wounded, bleeding, injured, but unstoppable. But Rome was a machine, and machines do not tire. The legions closed in. The rebel army disintegrated. The circle around Spartacus tightened. Yet he still did not retreat. Covered in wounds, surrounded on all sides, Spartacus kept fighting until he could fight no longer. His body was lost on the battlefield. No grave. No shrine. No monument. Rome believed it had erased him. Instead, it immortalized him. With Spartacus dead, Crassus unleashed Rome's final cruelty. 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, the long road between Capua and Rome. For miles and miles, wooden crosses lined the road, each bearing a rebel nailed in agony. It was Rome's warning to the world, no slave shall rise against us again. The crucified rebels were left there for months, no burials, no prayers, no mercy. Travelers could hear their screams. The air was filled with the stench of death. The empire wanted the memory of the rebellion burned into the minds of every slave in Italy. But Rome misunderstood something. You can kill a man. You can silence a voice. But once an idea is born, even death cannot stop it. For centuries after, the official Roman record tried to reduce Spartacus to a footnote, a gladiator who dared too much. But the world remembered differently. To slaves, he became a symbol of hope. To historians, he became a reminder of Rome's arrogance. To revolutionaries, he became an icon of rebellion. To storytellers, he became a timeless hero. Even without a grave, his legacy grew. Philosophers wrote about him, artists painted him, dramatists honored him, revolutionaries invoked his name, modern films and novels resurrected him. Spartacus became larger than history. He became an archetype, the eternal rebel. Who was Spartacus, truly? Not a king. Not a politician. Not a wealthy noble. He was a soldier enslaved by the empire he once served. A man pushed into the mud who stood up again. A man who did not choose rebellion but embraced it when destiny demanded. He united people who had nothing in common: Thracians, Gauls, Germans, Syrians, Africans, Italians, shepherds, farmers, miners, gladiators, and countless nameless slaves. Under Spartacus, these fragments of the ancient world became something Rome never imagined, a family bound by freedom. He did not fight for power. He fought for dignity. For liberation. For the simple right to live without chains. And that makes him greater than most conquerors in history. Why does Spartacus remain one of the most fascinating figures in human history? Because his story is universal. Every era has its empires. Every age has its injustices. Every society creates those who have power, and those who suffer under it. Spartacus represents the moment when the powerless stand up. He represents every worker who refuses to be exploited. Every oppressed person who says, enough. Every ordinary human being who realizes their own strength. He reminds us that history is not only written by kings and generals. Sometimes, it is written by a slave with nothing but courage. The Romans killed Spartacus. But they could not kill his message. That message still whispers across the centuries: no empire is invincible. No chain is unbreakable. And no human being is born to kneel. History is filled with emperors who ruled continents, with generals who commanded armies, with kings who carved their names into monuments of stone. Yet few of them are remembered as vividly as a single slave who owned nothing, not even his own life. Spartacus left behind no palace. No tomb. No treasure. No empire. But he left something far more powerful, a story that refuses to die. For 2,000 years, people have spoken his name with a sense of electricity, the thrill that comes from witnessing a human spirit rise against impossible odds. He is remembered not for what he conquered, but for what he defied. Rome called him an outlaw. The world calls him a legend. Spartacus forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about history: empires fall when they forget the humanity of the people beneath them. Rome believed it was untouchable, invincible. But Spartacus broke that illusion. He showed that even the greatest military machine in the ancient world could be shaken by ordinary people armed only with courage and desperation. He exposed the cracks in Roman society, its dependence on slavery. Its arrogance, its cruelty, its blind confidence in domination, in many ways, the revolt of Spartacus was not just a military uprising, it was a moral indictment. His rebellion asked a question that still resonates: what happens when a society builds its greatness on the suffering of the helpless? At its core, the story of Spartacus is not about swords or battles or war. It is about humans, people with dreams, families, fears, and hopes. The men and women who joined Spartacus were not warriors by choice. They were farmers, shepherds, miners, laborers, house slaves, field slaves, and ordinary people who had been denied freedom since birth. When they followed Spartacus, they were not following a conqueror. They were following a promise, the possibility of a life free from torture, chains, and humiliation. And this makes Spartacus different from most revolutionaries. He did not ask people to die for his ambition. He asked them to live for their own freedom. Few stories in ancient history spark as much imagination as this one. What if Spartacus had succeeded? What if he had crossed the Alps? What if his army had not split? What if the pirates had not betrayed him? What if Crassus had not been appointed? Historians still debate these possibilities. If Spartacus had escaped into Thrace or Gaul, he would have written an entirely different chapter in European history. Millions of slaves may have risen across the empire. Rome could have been destabilized from within. But history does not bend to what ifs. It bends to choices, and Spartacus made the choice to fight until the end. Spartacus did not live to see the world change. But his influence stretched beyond his lifetime, far beyond the reach of Roman swords. His name has been carried by abolitionists fighting slavery, revolutionaries challenging injustice, writers and filmmakers seeking heroes, people who believe in dignity and human rights. Spartacus reminds us of a truth older than Rome and stronger than any empire. A single life, driven by courage, can ignite a fire that burns for millennia. He stood up when he had every reason to bow down. He resisted when surrender was the easier path. He fought not for a crown, but for a principle: no human being is born to be owned by another. And for that belief, he became immortal. 2,000 years after his death, Spartacus continues to rise, in classrooms, in books, in cinema, in political movements, in the hearts of those who refuse to kneel. Rome tried to erase him, but the world resurrected him. Today, Spartacus stands not as a relic of the past, but as a symbol of the future, a reminder that freedom is worth fighting for, that dignity is worth dying for, and that even the smallest spark can light a fire across the ages. This was the story of Spartacus, the slave who became a warrior, the warrior who became a legend, and the legend who became eternal. History is shaped by empires, but legends are shaped by the ones who dared to defy them. And among all the names etched into the stone walls of time, emperors, kings, conquerors, there remains one name that refuses to fade: Spartacus. He was never a king, never crowned, never victorious in conquest. He left behind no monuments, no palace, no dynasty. And yet, his story outlived the men who defeated him. His rebellion echoed across centuries, while the Roman generals who crushed it faded into dusty pages of forgotten chronicles. Because Spartacus did not fight to rule. He fought to be free. And that is a legacy far more powerful than any empire. After his death, Rome tried to erase him. No statues. No poems. No official honors. Only silence, a silence meant to suffocate his memory. But silence is fragile. Because stories born from suffering have a way of surviving. Whispers traveled along trade routes, from slaves chained in Roman mines, to shepherds in the hills, to sailors at distant ports. They spoke of a gladiator who stood against Rome itself. A man who rose with nothing, no army, no wealth, no allies, except the fire inside him. And over time, that whisper became a roar. Nearly 2,000 years later, the world changed, but the story of Spartacus did not. In the age of revolutions, rebels in Europe invoked his name. Leaders of slave uprisings in the Caribbean told his story by firelight. Workers fighting exploitation in the 19th century carried banners marked with his name. To them, Spartacus was not a man of the ancient world. He was a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest spark can ignite a fire against injustice. Philosophers admired him. Poets wrote about him. Painters recreated his final stand on vast canvases, surrounded by dust and blood and unbreakable courage. And in the 20th century, Hollywood transformed the legend once more. Millions watched an enslaved warrior raise his voice against oppression. And though dramatized, the message remained the same: the human spirit bows to no chains. Through cinema, through literature, through political movements, Spartacus became more than a historical figure. He became a universal symbol of freedom. Yes, Rome defeated him on the battlefield, crucified thousands of rebels along the Appian Way, and declared the rebellion crushed forever. But Rome was wrong. Empires end. Armies turn to dust. Marble crumbles. But ideas endure. Spartacus' victory was not in the wars he fought. It was in the world he inspired. Every time someone refuses to surrender, every time a voice rises against oppression, every time a human spirit declares, "I will not live as a slave," Spartacus rises again. His life was short. His rebellion was doomed. But his legacy is eternal. Spartacus shows us that greatness is not measured in victories but in the courage to challenge the impossible. And that one man, even a man in chains, can shake an empire. He was a gladiator, a warrior, a leader, a symbol. He was Spartacus. And the world has never forgotten his name.